This is Spectrum.
Alternative medicine, homeopathy, secret society, hypnosis, the paranormal, alternative energy, UFO, abduction, the weird, the wild, and the wonderful.
With your hosts, Tom Theophanis and Scott Jordan.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Spectrum Radio Network. I'm Scott Jordan, and remember, there's no such thing as too much information. Hey guys, how you doing? It's been a while. Haven't talked to anybody. Haven't had any interviews in a while because I've been working 12-hour shifts in my real-life job. But we're back, and we have a guest today. His name is Gerry Cannon. He spent over 20 years experiencing synchronistic events that's led him on a search for Atlantis, the Ark of the Covenant, and a possible second Sphinx on the Giza Plateau. Gerry is born in April 6, 1935, in the East End of London, UK. Early in Gerry's life, he was conscripted, like many British subjects, to serve 2 years in the military, and he went to the Canal Zone in Egypt for 1 year as a photographer. In his life, Gerry's worked in several businesses, including buying and selling used clothing. His main business was antique reproduction shops and an auction gallery. He became involved with a Mormon scientist who invented a method to manufacture cement 8 times harder than normal, which he promoted in the UK in 1991. Gerry became involved in a paranormal search for the lost Ark of the Covenant, which caused him and his wife Mary to move to southern Spain. During many trips to Egypt, he made friends with the archaeological officials of the Giza Plateau, Lower and Upper Egypt, and also Luxor. Gerry discovered a Sphinx-shaped limestone mound in the western desert that resembled the Sphinx of the Giza Plateau. He also found what he thinks is a second Sphinx on the Giza Plateau that has yet to be unearthed. According to his research, years of searching and synchronistic and psychic events, Gerry now thinks that he's found the cave where the Ark of the Covenant has been buried under the sand for millennia. Let's welcome Gerry Cannon. Hello, Gerry.
Hi.
Nice to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Remember, I'm talking to you all the way from Spain and Europe. We're a long way away from Canada.
Ah, that's true. That's true. Bit of a hop, skip, and a jump. How would you like to start?
Well, let me first tell you about the Ark of the Covenant, although many of you are probably aware of these facts. It was made during the time when Moses led the children of Israel on an exodus from slavery in Egypt, which according to many scholars was around 1450 BC. However, some Hebrew scholars dated it at 1350 BC, but no one knows the exact date anyway. It was made to house the Ten Commandments written by the finger of God, so the Bible says, on 2 tablets of stone, which were given by God to Moses on a mountain in Sinai called Horeb. And nobody knows where that actually is now anyway. The ark was made under the guidance of a guy named Bezalel, who was a son of Ur. It's described in Exodus chapters 25, verses 10 to 22, so it's quite a little story. The box of the ark was made with acacia wood, which is a very hard wood that no insects can penetrate. Beaten gold was covered the inside and outside of the box, which I presume would make the box last indefinitely so as to preserve its contents. The dimensions of the box were described as being 2.5 cubits in length by 1.5 cubit in height by 1.5 cubits in width, and a cubit's around 18 inches, so you can work that out. 2 winged cherub figures of pure gold sat facing each other either side of the lid, which was known as the seat of God, with their tips of the wings touching each other. 2 pure gold rings were fixed either side of the box to support 2 poles, also made of acacia and coated with gold. 4 priests of the tribe of Levi were the ones that carried the box on their shoulders using these poles. They would have to travel, they were told to travel 200 cubits, which was 18 inches times 2,000, ahead of the Israelites so as they'd clear the way from any dangers or anything else that was around. No one really knows what the ark actually looks like, although many have drawn their interpretation of it, including me.
Okay, what started you on this research path?
Well, perhaps my story should begin after I was involved in a serious automobile accident. Fortunately, no one in either car was hurt at all. It happened in London in 1965 as I was crossing an intersection in a small road where there was no indication that shows the right of way. The van crossed at the same time and both of the vehicles collided. My car rolled over a few times and I was not aware of any shock and eventually smashed into a brick wall. The car was a total wreck of twisted metal and broken glass. In those days, seatbelts were unheard of in automobiles. Probably if I was wearing one, I probably wouldn't be here to tell the story. I simply crawled out through the window without a scratch on me, and after the accident, I heard the comments of passers-by saying, "Wow, whoever's in that vehicle must surely be dead." Still stunned, I asked one of the people to slap me on the back to make sure I was not a ghost standing next to them, as I thought I might have been dead. 2 passengers of the van were detained in hospital with minor injuries and shock, but were released after a few days. Although the police arrived, neither of the parties were prosecuted and there was no road signs posted. As the years went by, I started having many paranormal, unexplained situations, which I have to call experiences, unknown, whatever. The list of events are too numerous to relate at this time. For that and other reasons, I believe that I have been contacted by some psychic energy to find the Ark of the Covenant, which is what I'll be speaking about.
Okay.
Let me talk about the Old Testament first, though.
All right, let's talk about that.
Okay, in chapter 1 in Genesis, it mentioned that in the beginning God created heaven and earth and all that's in it, including animals and mankind. It didn't mention the colour of their skin, although the women that they were born to them were fair. And Genesis mentions that the Nephilim, the Hebrew word translation of the word giants, that is Nephilim, bore the fair women children who became mighty men. You may have known them as the Anunnaki. The same derives from the word in Hebrew of Anak. It is written in Numbers 13:33 actually, that we saw the Nephilim, the sons of the Anak, who became from the Nephilim. That's how it was described in the Bible. The Anunnaki were mentioned as distinguished men and also classed as sons of God. According to the claim of the author Zechariah Sitchin, you probably know him, who I often speak about, he interpreted the Sumerian myths and their gods. The Anunnaki were extraterrestrials according to his interpretations. They came from a planet in our solar system called Nibiru, Nibiru, which orbits the Earth. Due to this unusual orbit, Nibiru comes close to the sun, then goes back to the far reaches of the solar system, roughly 3,600 years. That's if Sitchin's account is to be believed. During the course of their history, the Anunnaki were forced to start looking for researchers and a home elsewhere on our solar system. Where the orbit of their home world, Nibiru, was closest to the sun, they found Earth. The Anunnaki decided that they wanted to lighten their labor load by creating a slave race, using an advanced knowledge of genetics that they combined with genetic material with that of primitive humans and man, and that's how man was born.
It's very interesting you say that, because we had a guest on named William Brown, who is a molecular biologist and has evidence of genetic manipulation of humans. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting for me too. I'll have to listen in on that. However, my theory is that they could have landed and colonized on a continent in the Pacific Ocean, later to be known as Lemuria, and perhaps taught them how to live in harmony by giving them certain rules to live by, something like the godly 10 Commandments inscribed on stone or crystal tablets, and they house them in a special container stored in a pyramid-shaped structure with the entrance guarded by a pair of stone crouching figures, something like the Sphinxes. According to some belief, Lemuria had submerged under the sea by a gigantic tsunami, probably caused by a meteorite crashing into the sea. The survivors with their precious container headed in an easterly direction to another land in the Atlantic Ocean, which may have been called Atlantis. It's likely that they could have erected a copy of the pyramid they had in Lemuria to house the box. According to many theories, Atlantis submerged around 10,500 years ago by a catastrophe in the sea. For some reason, the survivor again headed in an easterly direction, taking their box with them, and landed at another specific location that we know in Egypt. And there they had their own technology where they could build the pyramids and house their sacred box. According to Genesis and many other religious teachers and writings, a great flood engulfed the Middle East. Apparently the pyramids show signs that they were once underwater. That was by the investigations of a Dr. Robert Schoch of the Boston University and the Egyptologist John Anthony West, who I know quite well.
Yeah.
I often wonder why these sophisticated technologies of building the pyramids and no doubt many other gigantic monuments have lost, and no one really knows how they were erected. Maybe the descendants of the giants felt they had enough of planet Earth after so many disasters and fled back to their own planet, but didn't have time to take their precious box with them. A chapter in Exodus tells us that a man named Moses brought the same slave children of Israel out of bondage from Egypt. According to some renowned researchers, that happened around 1450 BC, but still we don't know exact dates. The reason why they were called the children of Israel, which a lot of you might not know, and the country so named, was because Isaac, son of Jacob, had changed his name to Israel when he wrestled with a paranormal figure who said, quoted in Genesis chapter 32, verse 28, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed." And in Genesis 32:30 it says, "So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved." So the pineal gland is actually a pine-shaped gland about the size of a grain of rice connected to the brain. It's also known as the psychic third eye. You've probably heard that as well.
Yeah.
According to my research, the pineal gland is in an upright position when one is born and travels in different positions during one's life, but it moves to an upright position when one dies. It's quite unusual. My theory is that it acts like some sort of an antenna when it's in an upright position, picking up some sort of invisible radio-like waves and converting the brain into thoughts. In other words, and when a psychic can tell you accurately about your past, there's a good chance that the things what he tells in the future can probably be correct. Why is it that some psychic can tell accurate events that happened in the past and inaccurate to others? Perhaps the psychic's pineal gland within an upright position or some other position when he did the reading.
Okay, so it's possible. What you're saying is it's possible that if a psychic's basically tuning into you, that wherever the position your pineal gland is in your life may line up to where theirs is on their life, and that's why they can read you so well, is because they're tuning into you. That frequency is open and the communication can occur.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, anyway, let's get back to the Exodus. If Moses brought up the Pharaoh's daughter, then he would have certainly been educated and he would have known more about the pyramids than we know today and probably aware of chambers that are now hidden and perhaps the box of records that the giants had stored within. He would have also known the geography of the land. 3 verses in Exodus mentions that the children of Israel must bring out gold jewelry when they leave Egypt. And why the hell would they need that? Surely more essential things would be food and weapons to protect them during the long journey to the land that God promised them. However, gold was required to manufacture the box of the Ark of the Covenant, so possibly that's why he told them. Mm-hmm. The Ark would have been too heavy to remove from the pyramid, yet he would have easily been able to remove the tablets to show the children of Israel and tell them about the 10 Commandments once he was far away from the Egyptians who were chasing them. It was interesting when I found out that the Hebrew word for the ark is pronounced Aaron, which is spelled A-R-O-N. And the word for the Moses' brother Aaron is spelled Aaron. Both have similar sounds.
Yes, very.
Was it a coincidence? Yeah. But is it a coincidence that the word for pyramid in Arabic is pronounced haram, spelled Haram, and they drop the H, so it normally sounds like Aram. So the sounds are all more or less similar. From the length of the description of the ark, it seems that Moses would have had a template. As I mentioned, it's so many verses, it tells you how it was made. Moses died before the children of Israel arrived in the promised land, and it was King David who brought the ark to Jerusalem, and Solomon his son, who became king, constructed an elaborate temple to house the ark approximately 500 years after it was made. According to the Old Testament, in chapters Kings 1, verses 8 and 9, it says, there was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in at Haran, where the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after they came out of Egypt. That was the actual last mention of the ark, and that's when it disappeared from the scriptures. Nobody knows what happened to it. There was another reference in Chronicles 2, chapter 35, verse 3, which says, put the holy ark in the house which King Solomon, son of King David of Israel, built, and you need not carry it on your shoulders. But the actual ark disappeared when it went into the Solomon's temple. No other mention was it.
Right.
It seems like it was the Exodus was some sort of a divine plan.
Now, what makes you think that it was a divine plan?
The Israelites are probably not all Hebrews, but people have believed in God. They were only a minority of the population on earth at that time, and were not able to spread the name of God further than themselves. So a man named Jesus, which is also named as Yahuwah, came on the scene a few hundred years later.
Yep.
And after he died, Christianity was formed, whereby millions more people believed in God. But that didn't seem to be enough to please God, so yet another man in 570 AD called Muhammad was born, and after he died as a prophet, the Muslim religion was formed, whereby millions more believed in God. So that was some sort of a divine plan.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I know how you made the distinction between Jesus and Yeshua, because the letter J is only 400 years old, and so there was never a Jesus, as it were, because the letter J is relatively recent in human history. So, I mean, Yeshua, but everybody knows him as Jesus, so that's cool. It's technicalities, really.
Okay.
How does this all connect? How does all of that connect to you personally?
As I first mentioned, throughout my life, I've had many paranormal experiences. 2 outstanding, which I'm not going to talk about now, were finding an adopted child that was had an unknown sister, which was my first wife, which was a family secret. Although we lived in England, I found that her in Australia about 2 weeks later. The other discovery was finding my great-great-great-grandfather whilst I was living in the USA. It was another interesting story. Anyway, I guess my Arkquest began the night of the Chinese New Year back in 1991. That was a couple of years after my wife, Mary, and I purchased a new home in Las Vegas. What happened was I woke up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night after a vivid dream of continuing seeing floating numbers 3, 6, and 9. They were so vivid, it was just like not having a nightmare, but it was just big numbers coming up on the screen in my head. The following morning I told my wife, who's Chinese, and she mentioned that the number 9 is strongly associated with the Chinese dragon, a symbol of magic and power. And 9 also symbolizes the emperor. And the number 9 can be found in many ornaments on the Forbidden City. And a well-known district in Hong Kong, which a lot of people know and called Kowloon, that literally means 9 dragons. Number 6 signifies celestial power, and number 3 represents heaven, mankind, and earth. So those numbers were pretty powerful. A few weeks later, I met an elderly religious Mormon scientist named Harvey Jepson, who visited us after driving 12 hours from Utah to Las Vegas in his truck. An old man to do, he was probably in his 80 years old, an old man to do that was quite special.
Really?
He developed a formula to make many substances 8 times stronger than concrete, including sand and salt. Unfortunately, his accountant embezzled $2 million from many of his clients to buy shares in the company he formed, and the old man was not only humiliated, but his company went into liquidation. And his partner bought out the machinery and samples from the bank, but was unable to make products as the scientist did not trust him and kept the actual formula to himself. Harvey and I was about to visit the UK and asked me to become his partner to promote his product, as he wasn't allowed to do it in the USA. Within a few days, I made headlines in the media and had the samples tested, and from many of the companies which I contacted. Realizing that I need a base, my wife and I, we needed a base to be in Europe because we couldn't do everything from the USA. So my wife and I chose southern Spain as where we could be because the weather was warm and we're used to that climate. And then on impulse, we just bought a villa. Little did I know, without knowing, that this story would never have been told. If I never went to Spain, I wouldn't be here to tell it because everything seemed to have happened. Anyway, apparently Harvey's ex-partner heard what I was doing, and his lawyers warned me not to continue. But in any case, I sent the samples to Harvey to test. Yet when I went back to Las Vegas, I discovered that Harvey disappeared. Apparently the lawyers had frightened him, and later I found out that Harvey fled to another state and died. So ended my would-be multi-millionaire career.
Wow, that's crazy. It seems game-changing inventors always get threatened.
You're right.
You know, you mentioned earlier about psychic events and synchronicities. Can you tell me more about that specifically?
Well, early one morning, while sitting in my home in Las Vegas, I found myself staring at a large map of the world which was hung on the wall in front of me. And I seemed to have been hypnotized to it because for some reason I felt impelled to walk over to it and put my index finger in the center of the map with the thought that this was the center of the world. And as I did that, my finger started moving an inch or so to the east of that point. And the tip of my finger started becoming very warm and it got hot. I got a bit nervous. Without knowing why, I kept saying to myself that something important was buried there. Perhaps I'd subconsciously map dowsed. You know what map dowsing is, don't you? As I heard about dowsing many years later, and people put their fingers on maps and found different places. Anyhow, I got a large ruler and drew 2 lines crossing the center. In other words, from top left to top bottom right and top left to bottom left, whatever. And I told my wife about the incident, and she said, "Oh, I must be dreaming, forget about it." But before selling our newly constructed house in Las Vegas, we began taking Spanish lessons as we intended living in Spain permanently. It's difficult for my wife to pronounce and learn Spanish, so I had a crazy notion for her to be regressed into a past life where she may have known Spanish. Stupid thought, but I thought, well, let's try it. So I contacted a local hypnotist named Evelyn Shift, who wanted to regress her but wouldn't charge. She thought it was a good idea. We became friendly with her, and she mentioned that one of the people she knew practiced paranormal automatic writing, which was something I'd never heard of. But early one morning, a few weeks later, while sitting in my same office, I felt a tempt to try and do this writing. So I placed a pen in my hand, and with the tip of the pen was on a blank piece of paper, and I closed my eyes, keeping my mind free of any thought. A minute or so after, I sensed my hand moving, and when it stopped, I opened my eyes, and on the paper were written, scrawled on the paper, was the words FINDTHEARK, find the ark.
Yeah, find the ark.
Didn't mean anything to me, so I attempted doing it again. and once more the words appeared, "Find the Ark." It happened again on my third attempt, and I just sat there pondering what these strange words meant, because I had no idea what the Ark was or anything else. Anyhow, without any conclusions, again, I put my hand on the paper and started to do the automatic writing, wherever it come through, and I felt my arm swinging across the desk as though someone had pulled it, and my hand started making crosses and circles all over again and seemed to be the same area. And I got nervous and I looked to see what I was done. To my amazement, my atlas of the world, which was opened, and I certainly hadn't taken it off the bookshelf, but it was open to a page, and that mystified me because most of all the cross and circles were in the area of Egypt, just where my finger heated up on the Walmac earlier. I felt very strange that this had happened because the book, the atlas wasn't there. I mean, I could swear it wasn't there. There was no reason why I would have had the atlas in front of me.
Right.
Anyhow, I once again closed my eyes and with a pen on the paper as before, I kept thinking to myself, who the hell's making me do all this? And the pen started moving again. And when I looked, this time the word M-O-S-E-C was sprawled across the paper.
Mosaic.
The word didn't mean Mosaic, yeah, it was like M-O-S-E-C. But the word didn't mean anything to me. I've never heard of it before. But it sounded like the biblical name for Moses. So I began the writing again, and eyes closed, and I said out loud, "Is this supposed to be Moses?" I did it 3 more times, but the same word appeared, Mosaic. None of this made any sense to me. It just didn't make any sense. A few days later, I tried automatic in my wife's presence, and that was on the 18th of August, 1991. I've made notes of all this and all what I've been doing. In fact, I've even kept all the pages and everything I've been written on, the actual pages.
Yeah.
When the words Mosaic and the Ark kept appearing, and she asked whether we'd get any other information. And surprisingly enough, some words appeared, the word agent, box, described in Bible, Egypt, Spain, help mission will be successful, don't open the box, 2 persons will be present, peace around the world, and the word Oslo. All this makes sense to me. But we now realise that the Ark, that it was the Ark, this Ark that they kept mentioning on the paper. And on other occasions, and plenty of times, I used to start writing. When I started doing the automatic writing, I'd start drawing beautiful flowers and pictures, which I'm not an artist and something I could never do.
Right.
Anyhow, 2 years later, we found that there was a peace treaty signed in Oslo between PLO and Israel. And we got this from this psychic writing, 2 years earlier.
Right, because you dated everything, yeah.
Yeah, I dated the whole lot, and we've actually got the paper. So if anybody wanted DNA, if they wanted to find out whatever they want to do to find out when it was written, but they could tell that it was 2 years earlier that this happened, that the actual Oslo Accord happened. But I didn't feel like doing any more writing after that because we were busy packing and shipping all our stuff and getting the house sold. The villa in Spain took a year to reform to our liking, landscaping the garden, so we kept pretty busy. And we bought a couple of German dogs that we trained, and the thoughts of Mosaic and the Ark were far from our mind. But anyway, Mary developed what's known as a frozen shoulder, probably from helped me move the furniture around, and able to lift her arm. And it was suggested that we get some treatment from a faith healer who was working a local holistic and psychic health fair. It didn't help, but we met a woman who knew from our dog training class that mentioned she had a Hungarian gypsy friend named Giovanna who was a clairvoyant and very good at giving readings. And it was Mary's birthday the following week, so I phoned her to come along and give Mary a reading. A frail-looking woman arrived and gave Mary a reading for half an hour, which did not make any sense, but charged us $50. So she did quite well out of doing nothing. But as she was leaving, she said to me, "What about you having a reading?" And with a quizzical look on my eyes, I said, "No way." I thought, I'm not stupid enough to pay another.
I've already dumped $50 into this.
I've dumped $50, not going to do any more. Anyhow, she must have read my mind, because she said, "I'm not charging you, don't worry, this is free." So I got
all right, that's a good price.
I said, "Fine, yeah, well, the free's all right. I mean, I'll have 2 of them." Anyhow, the first thing she said was she saw numbers floating around me. And my thoughts flashed back to the day in Vegas when I had that dream. And she went on saying that I'm looking for something buried in the sands in Egypt. And this really startled me, because I hadn't told anybody in Spain about this was going on, or my automatic writing or anything. And then she told me, whatever you're looking for, you're going to find. So I just let her talk. I mean, this was quite interesting. But she told me to find what I was looking for, I'd have to read between the lines in my notes. And that puzzled me. I didn't know what she meant. Wow. She ended up saying, "Only you and one other person will be with me," and then left for another appointment. It wasn't the first time I had clairvoyance reading. As before I was married, in England, I had some quite successful readings from other people. Maybe they're tuned into me and pick up what I've got. But apparently Giovanna was able to tune into me, and not my wife. Perhaps the pineal gland was in the right position for both of us, as you said.
Yeah.
Although she picked up some of the things from the automatic writing, but what she meant between the lines, I didn't know. But that night, around 3 a.m., I was unable to go back to sleep, thinking about what Giovanna said. And suddenly I knew what the lines were, so I got out of bed and went to the bookshelf where that same atlas I had with all the Chris's and the crosses on, which we did with mosaics, and between the lines would have meant the coordinates, because lines on a map are coordinates lines.
Right.
It was all beginning to make sense, but I still had plenty of work to complete around the house to do anything about it, except for reading the Exodus and making notes about the Ark, where I learnt more about the Ark, reading the Bible and stuff like that there, because I knew nothing about it.
Right. You had to do
a month later, while listening to an English-speaking radio station, in fact, Mary was listening to it, there was a woman named Joyce Morgan was being interviewed, as she was a renowned psychic artist. And Mary said I should contact her, because she might be able to tell me more about this automatic writing. After contacting the radio station for a phone number, I immediately called her. Now, this is quite strange. I asked if she knew anything about automatic writing, and she stopped me by saying that she was expecting my call and that she had to see me. I thought, this is unusual. Actually, I felt that this was a come-on.
Yeah.
In other words, she wanted money for reading.
Yeah, they'd say, "Oh, I'm so glad you called. I've been waiting for your call. Come in and give me money."
That's right, that's it. However, she went on to say that she had to help me and she's not going to charge me. Another one not charging me.
Okay, take 2 of those.
I asked where, yeah, 4 of those. I asked where she lived, and it was about 99 miles away, which was close to the airport. And now to us, 99 miles is quite a distance. I know over in America and Canada, 99 miles is nothing. People drive that to go to work. But in Spain, it's a long way. Anyhow, I thanked her and told her, "I'm very busy, but it's a very long way to travel, Joyce. But I'll phone you whenever I've got to go and pick up friends and family at the airport." "No," she says, "you're coming tomorrow." I told her I couldn't, but she was so adamant, telling me that I'd be seeing her that soon. I apologised and I said to her, let me have your address and I'll give you a call, and I hung up. Anyway, a few minutes later, our insurance agent phoned me to tell me my car insurance policy that I'd ordered that morning was ready and it was being sent to me from head office. It would probably take a week to receive because the post over in Spain isn't that good, but I needed it urgently. The agent said if you really want to pick it up, then you'd have to come to the office, which is near the airport. And I checked out where the office was, and it was right next to where this girl Joyce lived.
Ah. Guess what?
It was amazing. It was amazing. Guess what? I immediately phoned her, and I said, Joyce, is tomorrow be okay to see you? I heard a chuckle, and she said, I told you you're coming to see me tomorrow. Well, she was good.
Yeah.
Okay, she and her husband lived
enough of doubting her now.
She was pretty good.
Yep.
She and her husband lived in a farmhouse, and they called it Serendipity, which was quite a good name for it, I believe, where she did her psychic gatherings and her husband Tom did alternate healing and medicine. And they also used their home to accommodate, free of charge, homeless people and feeding stray cats and dogs. They were really, really good people. Anyhow, after brewing us a cup of tea, she said she thought she'd give Mary a reading first, and I chatted to her husband Tom. She led her into another room. About 15 minutes later, Mary appeared clutching a sketch of a young woman wearing a Chinese dress who apparently had died, although Mary was not aware who she was, but Joyce said that she would know who the girl was when she got home. Okay. She also told Mary actually about her past. She was very good. I didn't ask her what there and then, but she told me she was good. Joyce, who nothing about me, then said, okay, let's come into another room. And I sat opposite her on a table, and she says that this recording has to be, what she's going to tell me has to be recorded. All right. And I said, why is that? Because she says, you're going to need this later on, and you're going to listen to it listen to it in detail. And after starting a tape recorder, she sat with her eyes closed for a few minutes meditating. Then she kept whispering the words, numbers, numbers, numbers. She then told me that she could visualize numbers floating around me. Again, like this other girl, the other psychic.
Now, let me guess. 3, 6, and 9.
Correct. She says they were prominent numbers. I mean, these psychics, when they're good, they're damn good.
Yep.
She even named the district where I was born in London, which was Bow. I was a place in London called Bow, B-O-W, and she said, I could visualize a place you're living in with a letter B and sounded like Bow, Bow, Boo or something, and she named it. And she then told me where my grandparents came from. And what stunned me was she said, I've got an ill relative living alone in South America. I remember sitting there in awe and amazement because everything she said was correct.
She was bang on.
Yeah, she told me things that I did have an ill relative living in South America, and that was true. And my parents, and my parent, and everything else. But the thing that really shocked me was that she said, I have a close relative living in Hong Kong. But at the time I thought, well, that's a bit easy to say because my wife's from Chinese and she had plenty of relatives. I'd have plenty of relatives in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But she says, no, it's not Mary's family. Someone close, like your uncle or cousin. Then she paused, closed her eyes and blurted out, no, it's someone closer. And she just, off the pat of her head, she said, did you have a brother living in Hong Kong? I felt my legs giving away. I remember that. I started shivering. I told her that my brother is now living in Hong Kong as he just got posted as a teacher to the university. That girl was so accurate. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, she was really, just 100% on.
Yeah. Some of these guys are good and some are bad. She went on with her eyes closed, telling me that she could visualize a man in a tent or a cave in the desert wearing ancient Arabic attire. So it's probably in Egypt, she says. And my heart's thumping when she says, are you looking for an Egyptian box? I was puzzled.
Wow.
Sat there flabbergasted, unable to answer. I just sat there and she looked at me. And she said, oh, let me sketch what I'm visualizing. And she quickly drew what looked like the Ark of the Covenant described in Exodus. I've got that drawing. It's quite good. Anyhow, she then on and said, I've got to draw your spirit guide because you don't know what he looks like. I says, fine. She hastily sketched a sketch which looked like a biblical character with long hair and a V-shaped beard. She thought his name began with the letter M, which sounded like the word Mrs. or Mrs. or Mussis or something like that.
Okay.
Again, she obviously knew it must have been this Mosek, because she come up later with that word. Things were surely getting interested. I asked her how could she be sure that this was my spirit guide. I mean, she could have drawn anything and said this is a guide, or anyone could come up with a picture and say, hey, this is your guide. But she says, no, you're going to realise it's correct when you get home and study my drawing. I'm sure you'll find something on it. And she did that, the sketch actually, in about half a minute. She was very, very fast, a very good artist. I then told her about my automatic writing and what happened and how accurate she was with all the reading. But before she left, she said she's got to do a lot of work on me, and we visited her many times and extremely good results come up. Anyhow, that evening when we got home from the first visit with Joyce, Mary found an old photograph of a friend she once knew in Hong Kong, and it looked exactly like the sketch Joyce had drawn, even to the clothes she was wearing on the picture, and the drawing had the same clothes on.
All right.
So I said to Mary, is she dead? And she said, I shouldn't think so. She wouldn't be that old. So I said, well, how are we going to find out? She says, I'm going to phone one of her friends in England who would probably know more about her and where she lives and everything else. And we did that, and she came back to me with a white face, and she was shocked. She says, guess what? She told me the girl died several years ago.
Wow.
That was really something. Okay, we then studied the drawing of my so-called spirit guide that we now believe is Mosek, and we noticed that in his right iris, on the actual iris of the eye on the sketch, there was a shape that looks like the Sinai Peninsula. And that's Sinai Peninsula is between Egypt and Israel, and that actually was where the Ark was built, and possibly where Moses was, and with the Ark, I don't know.
Right.
Anyhow, we visited Joyce many times, and although she never been to Egypt, in fact, she'd never been anywhere except Spain, she was able to draw a freestanding cave in an area of the desert where she said the Ark would be buried, and she come up with a drawing of a cave. And I mentioned to her that it's unusual because, most caves aren't freestanding. They're cut into a mountainside.
Right.
But she said, no, the cave was probably much larger thousands of years ago, and it would have deteriorated, and probably it was originally made out of limestone formation, and with the wind and the rain or whatever, the weather conditions and everything else, it deteriorated, and it's now just a stump or blob there with a cave. Okay. But then I said, well, how am I going to find this cave? She says, well, to find the cave, there's 5 landmarks you're going to find, and when you find those landmarks, you'll know it's the cave. I says, where, in the middle of the desert? She says, yeah. She said, but when you find those landmarks, you're only going to find it with one other person with you. If you go with anybody else, you won't find the landmarks. I said, well, what's the landmarks? She said, well, the cave is freestanding as I've drawn, and it's going to be mostly filled with sand, and all around the cave, there'll be skeleton bones around them. I says, human or animal? She says, I don't know. She says, but you're going to see a lot of bones, skeletons all the way around the cave. That's the landmark.
Okay.
And the other landmark, she said that the cave's not only going to have a front entrance, but there's going to be a back aperture as well. So whether the back would be the front or the front would be the back, we don't know, but there'd be 2 apertures in the cave. I said, that's interesting. She says, and behind the cave, you're going to see a pyramid-shaped mountain. And I thought, pyramid? Yeah, she says, sort of a pyramid. It's like a pyramid with a flattish top, but I call it a pyramid mountain, she says. I said, well, what's the other landmark? She said, the other landmark's going to be a huge, well, there's going to be a river. There's going to be 2 more landmarks, she said, because there's 5. One's going to be a dried-up river in front of the cave. she said it's dried up because years ago when the cave was there, there was a river running through there. But the fifth landmark, which is very unusual, she says, but you will find it, and it's going to be a gigantic tree from a rock. It's going to be a huge rock that looks like a tree, and that's going to be close by.
Okay.
I remember smiling when I told her, Joyce, this is going to be impossible find. She says, don't worry, you'll find it. During the workshops, I found that I had the ability to do psychometry. You probably know what it's like, holding an object like a ring or a watch that someone's worn for many years, and you pick up vibrations and information from that person. You've probably heard about that, haven't you?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Anyhow, a few years after the meeting, while walking after the meeting with Joyce, I was walking my dog up the road where we live, and a guy was building, one of our neighbours was building a wall outside, and he was standing out there, and he said his daughter's there, named Dawn, who I've never met, and he introduced me to her, but he says, on the quiet, she's a bit imaginative. She always talks about fairies and spirits, so don't take too much what she's talking about for granted. But as soon as she saw me, she wanted to talk. And she says, can I walk with the dog with you? And I said, fine, because I want to be alone. I said, okay, I'll listen to what she said. And she started looking at me and she said, am I looking for something? I said, what do you mean, am I looking for something? Taking the dog for a walk. She said, no, I feel that you're looking for something. And she says, something to do with King Solomon's temple. I thought, whoa, how the hell has this girl come up with stuff? It frightened the shit out of me, all due respects. Okay, so I said, well, okay, let me think about that. And she says, no, I think I want to see you tomorrow. Can I see you tomorrow? I says, fine, come to her house and come and visit me. Because it was all a bit strange to me. And the next day, she came to the house with two bits of paper in her hand. One was a drawing of the Ark and a goblet on it. And God knows why she had drawn that, but obviously she picked that up. And the other, she said, is a drawing of my spirit guide. And I looked at this drawing she did, and she wasn't a good artist, but you could see what it was. And it was a sketch, just like Joyce had done, of a guy with a lot of hair and a V-shaped beard. It was incredibly like the same one drawing that Joyce had done. And there's no way she would have known about me. She wouldn't have known about Joyce, because I've never, as I said, I've never spoken to anything about it. My neighbour didn't know, otherwise they'd have thought I'm crazy talking about all this stuff.
Right.
When I questioned her why she shrugged it, she just shrugged her shoulders and said she felt she has to do this. In the middle of the night, she woke up and said, I've got to do some drawings for me. So I said to her, if that's my spirit guide, has he got a name? And she says it starts with the letter M, but I'm not very good at spelling. Is it probably Mulak or Malak or something? Or I said, well, word Mosek sound in it? Mosek? She says, yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. That's a name. I says, you sure? She says, yeah, I knew it was something with an M, Mulak or Musik or something like that, but that sounds right to me. She was quite weird, like her father told her, but she certainly knew what she was doing.
Right.
It was quite interesting when I completed it.
I've actually seen both of those drawings because I've seen all of your paperwork and everything you've been describing. I've seen photographs of this stuff, and I got to say that those two drawings are remarkably similar.
Well, what was not only similar, but when I looked in the right eye of the one she did the exact same drawing of the peninsula in Egypt on the same eye as Mosek had. And to me, that was quite incredible.
Yep, and I've got the zoom-ins here of both eyes, of both drawings. And You're right, the peninsula is on both of them.
Yeah. She came in. She couldn't understand what it was all about because I didn't show her Joyce's pictures, but I kept everything from her.
That's very interesting. Well, carry on with the story. I'm sure there's more.
Yeah, there's quite a lot more. Well, when I say a lot more, I've written 500 pages of a book, so I'm only going to give you a little bit. So this is a bit more anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, in 1994, my wife and I visited Israel. But before we left, Joyce says, when we go to Israel, I'm going to find a very old map. I said, what do you mean an old map? He says, it would give you an idea of what you're doing, but you're going to find a very ancient map when you go there. I says, fine. Now, when we were there, we were invited for lunch by a well-known psychic in Israel by the name of Menorah. And both she and her husband Liam came from South Africa. She heard about my experiences, psychic experience, through someone I met in Gibraltar, which is where we do our shopping, about 20 miles from us in Spain. I live in southern Spain. Right. Before we went into a room that she used for meditation. She said to me, lay down on a bed. And when I looked up, above my head was a huge crystal suspended from the ceiling. And she spoke very softly, I remember, putting me into a deep meditation. And she says, this, just like Joy, she says, we have to record this. And the session was recorded on the 15th of October, 1994, by an associate named Haggett, an Israeli woman. Within a few minutes, she went into a trance and began speaking in a deep voice that there was a Mosaic, and I was his agent, and the time was not right to find the Ark. And I began channeling Mosaic in a crackled voice, which was something I'd done in serendipity. And I mentioned that, or whoever mentioned it through my voice, said 7 stops. Apparently, he, Mosaic, and his men made 7 stops to get to the cave. Also mentioning a big tree that would be passing.
Okay.
And people should remember that, and it also come up with the words, people should remember, or Miss Mosaic come up with the words, people should remember the 10 Commandments, and he also spoke about peace all at this session. Anyway, before completing our tour of Israel, we had another surprise. Our tour agent told us that 2 people who paid for a trip, they had to cancel 2 days before, to go to the monastery called Sinai Catherine Monastery, Monastery of the Sinai, and that's apparently where a lot of people believe Mount Sinai is, and they call it Mount Sinai, which is about a couple of miles away from there.
Okay.
Anyhow, there are about 6 other people, plus our 2 guides on this bumpy trip. We had to cross the desert. There was a road there, but we were the only people on the road, which you have to go in pairs, because if one of you break down, you're stuck. And mobile phones don't work that great easy out in the desert. We started out about 5 o'clock in the morning, but as I say, it was a bit scary because the 5-hour journey, we didn't see any other vehicles on the road except the one in front of us.
Wow.
Who was traveling with us. A bit scary, but still, I mean, if we both broke down, God knows what would happen. But I had an interesting experience while walking up the uneven stone-hewn steps, which are on this Mount Sinai, where you get to the top. And the guy said, if we get to the top of this mountain, of course, we were pretty high up anyway, we're elevated where we stopped the trucks, because there was sand dunes and stuff like that going up there. And she said, we're going to have a spectacular view of the sunset when we get there. But I suddenly stopped about halfway up, and I said to the guide, it's pointless for me to go. I don't want to see the sunset. I felt I've got to stay here because this is more important for me. So pick me up when you return. I said, okay. And at that time, my wife with one of the guides she didn't want to go to the top either. So she stopped a little way before us in a little place where they sell Coca-Colas and drinks like that. It was on a little kiosk there. Mm. Anyhow, I turned around on the step, and below me was a picturesque valley, and I gazed at it for several minutes and took a lot of pictures. and something made me stand up and recite out loud the Ten Commandments. And it was then that I realized that for Moses to be heard by thousands of Israelites when he told them the Ten Commandments, and they never had speakers there, how they would have done it. But all of a sudden, as I started speaking, my voice echoed loudly across all the mountaintops around me. It was quite unusual. It like billowed back to me the Ten Commandments. So possibly, if mountain was on any mountaintop, because I say we don't know whether that was Mount Sinai or not, but any mountaintop, they say he went up a mountain according to the Bible, if he would have recited the Ten Commandments for the children of Israel to be heard, and for the mountains around, they would have, echoed around it.
Right, you'd have to have a valley in which to echo in, right?
Yeah, and this was it. So it's quite unusual to find out how he actually did it. And on that night we had to sleep in tents, and luckily it was like a little camp there where the tourists would go, and there was a little bathroom there, but there was no huts. We all slept in tents. And the next morning they gave us a little breakfast. And then we were transported to St. Catherine's Monastery, which is an ancient monastery built in the year 300. And the monks that are there were Greek monks, and they've been using that monastery for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. And we were told by the guide, she said, well, there were two guys, a man and a woman, and she said she'll have to wait outside because we should all go in there for a couple of hours or an hour, whatever it is, and take a look around and see the inside of this monastery. But it'd be pointless talking to the Greek monks because none of them speak English. So the group started walking around, and for some reason or other, God knows what, I approached one of the monks. And when I talked to him, I found out he spoke perfect English. And I hurriedly told him my interest in the Ark because we were near this monastery at Mount Sinai, so-called, wherever it was. And he said, I want to show you around.
Wow.
And he said, I'm going to take you to one of the holiest places in the monastery. He was one of the leading monks there, chief monks there. And he said, no tourists go in there, but I want to take you in there. I said, thank you very much. That'd be interesting. So when I was in there, and his back was turned, talking to Mary, and I took a few pictures. And he then said to me, I'm now going to take you to another room, which is one of the oldest libraries in the world, which is upstairs. And inside I saw a glass case with an ancient book in it, or manuscript, or map in it, or drawing, and it was open on a page showing Moses alongside the Ark of the Covenant coming down the mountain, going down the mountain. It's quite unusual.
Wow.
But unfortunately, there was too much glare on, so when I took the picture on my old 35mm camera, in those days we never had the new digital cameras like we got today, where you can look at a picture and see if it didn't come out, you take another one. So I had to use the flash, and during that time, the monk had left us alone, and when he returned to the room and he served us tea, and then as we went out, the guide who was taking us back in our two trucks back to Israel, he said, I want to show you something which I don't normally show the tourists, but I was interested in all this antiquity stuff. He says, a few miles away from the monastery, we stopped, and he said, I'm going to show you a carving. And I says, what carving? He said, well, it's about 50 foot long, and it's a carving cut out of a mountainside of a calf. And the calf was actually mentioned in the Old Testament in Exodus, because when Moses came down from the mountain with the tablets of stone, he saw the Israelites, because they didn't think it was going to come down. They thought that God had left them there in the middle of the desert, so they thought they're going to go back to worshipping animals, and they worshipped a golden calf.
Right.
And they used their gold, what they had, to make a golden calf, and this calf is actually on the mountainside. I think you must have seen a picture of it.
I've seen the picture of it. It's huge.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. That's cool. Did you ever end up going back to the Middle East?
Yeah. A few years later, I spent a week with my wife, and we went to Egypt. We had a cruise on the Nile, and we went sightseeing in Cairo. Especially I wanted to see the Sphinx and the pyramids. It seems as though I was ordained to make friends with the archaeology officials of the SCA, that's the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt. I also met a guy by the name of Dr. Zay Hawass. Probably a lot of people have heard of him.
Oh, yeah.
He was then the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities. And I met another guy named Adel Hussein, and he was the director of the Giza pyramids. And I got quite friendly with the guy. He helped me quite a lot. Actually, I got friendly because I did some healing on him. He had a problem lifting his arm, the outstretched arm no further than his shoulders. And within a couple of minutes, I got him to raise it horizontal to the ceiling. So he was quite impressed, and he thought if I could do that and his doctors couldn't do it, I was like Jesus Christ to him. Anyhow, I was allowed to visit, he gave me permission to go into the Queen's Chamber after it was closed to tourists with one of his archaeologists. And a strange thing happened there. To get into the chambers of the pyramids, you have to crawl down a long corridor. It's only about 4 foot high, so probably less than that, 3 foot high, and you've got to crawl down it. And a strange thing happens when we got into this Queen's Chamber. There's two big chambers there, with the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber. And what I did was I closed my eyes and I placed both of my arms with my hands touching the north wall high up, and as I touched it, all of a sudden, after a few seconds, it seemed as though my body was moving into the wall. So I just stopped. I got a bit nervous, especially was in the pyramid by myself, just with this guide with me. So I told the archaeologist to copy what I did, and he had the same effect. And he said, "Come on, we better get out of here." We're not saying he got nervous too. I also got introduced to another guy called Monsieur Barak, and he's currently the director of the General of Antiquities of Luxor, which is a big place where there's a lot of archaeological finds. Mm-hmm. On another occasion, I made friends with Mohammed Ibn Bakr. Now, Mohammed Ibn Bakr was the former chairman of the Egyptian Antiquities. He was quite a big man, and he's very, very well respected and well known throughout all the archaeologists in Egypt. And he, at the moment, is a very, very good friend of mine. He's helped me quite a lot in all what I've been doing. Anyhow, whilst I was in Egypt, I wanted to visit some monasteries. There's 4 monasteries where Christian Coptics, you heard of Coptics? They live in monasteries up in a place called Wadi El Natroun, and that's situated halfway between Cairo and Alexandria, which is in the north. Mm-hmm. And at that time, the Coptic monks. At that time, because the monks I saw were the ones, the Greek monks. So these were Coptic monks. The Greek monks were over in the Sinai. At that time, I thought it would be close to the area where the cave would be, according to the map and what I had on the wall and areas which I'd been looking at. However, my driver took me to the wrong monastery, and we landed up in the gates of a monastery called El Baramos. And yet things turned out better there than I even expected. I was introduced to a young monk that spoke perfect English, and he mentioned that the monastery was founded around 330 AD, and its vaults contain many ancient manuscripts of old books. Some books, some of them were in Hebrew, and the monk said that he's learning Hebrew so he can read them, because it must be interesting to do that. I said, well, better than that. It's better off if you get someone who can translate the books from Israel, or some Hebrew guy that does it, because it could be interesting, and get them all photographed. He says, good idea.
Right.
But he said that the founder of the monastery, when it was done back in the 300 AD, whatever, he said he was guided there by cherubim. And I looked at him and I says, well, you know, they were mentioned in the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, cherubs, also known as angels of the second order.
Yeah, yeah. And that felt interesting because here I'm looking for something out in the desert, quite a few miles away. Well, I say a few miles, maybe 100 miles away from where he was, but out in the desert. And he said he was led there. So that seemed quite strange to me. Then he led me to a courtyard that had a fountain, and the fountain was made out of petrified wood. Petrified wood is millions-of-year-old wood, which they found in the desert. And I says, where did they get the wood from? And he gave us directions to where there was a forest in the desert of petrified wood. And, you know, to find petrified wood or to buy petrified wood, we're talking of, you know, $100 for a piece about 6 inches long. And here the guy's telling me that there's a whole desert full of it.
Wow.
Because petrified wood
like a whole underground, under sand forest.
Yeah, but the petrified wood is like wood. It's like metal. It looks like it clings like metal, and it's hard as metal. It's petrified, you know. So he gave us the directions, and eventually we came to a makeshift road, and either side of the road were these huge logs, petrified logs. With, you know, we're talking about millions of them. And the whole desert was full of it. When you walk to the side off this beaten road, kick the sand up and you see more of it. It was a whole desert there. It was unbelievable. And I thought, well, it's in the direction of the cave, but there's no way we can get out there. It's a long way to go. And the guy's got his taxi. He couldn't maneuver on sand.
Right, you need a 4x4.
Yeah, you need a 4x2 to do it. Anyway, a year later, I found on the internet an American that worked in Cairo, and he goes out with a group of people to different coordinates around the world. Well, he was in Egypt, he was doing it in Egypt, and what he does, well, they get to a coordinates, and they put a marker there, and he says, I'm the first guy that's photographed and been out to this coordinates. It's like his mark for it. Okay. You know, gives a GPS reading and takes a picture of the surrounding area, and he more or less stakes his claim to it. Well, not his claim that he was there before anybody else.
Right.
And when I looked at the picture he took of the surrounding area, I saw a pyramid-shaped hill. And it looked like what I wanted to find. It looked like the one that was in the drawing that Joyce had done. And a few weeks later, I met an Englishman on the internet that was interested in my research, and he suggested, let's go and get a team and go to Egypt and check out the area and see if we can find the cave. I thought, good idea. I wouldn't want to go alone, so it's nice to have a group with me, and it wouldn't cost us much. Right. So that's great. So I looked at the map, and I found there was another monastery on the map, not the one where we went, but in another part of Egypt, south actually, which seemed to be close to where this guy's coordinates was of this hill. So we got a team together, 5 of them actually. One was a Canadian, and the guy who I met on the internet was actually Welsh, and we had another guy from Birmingham, and we got a cameraman from Switzerland. And off we went to Cairo. Wow. We met there in a hostel because none of us had got much money, so we went out. We could only stay in a hostel. So we said we'd get our flights, arrange a date, put our money together, and get a couple of 4x4s and see if we can get out there. We got introduced to an English-speaking Egyptian guide who said he can direct us to this monastery. So he said. So we hired 2 4x4s. And we followed the guy's directions, stopping overnight in a small hotel that he knew. We stopped on the way the next day to visit some old pyramids which are out there, and we continued the journey. But as we continued, we were stopped by 2 military trucks, and one of the trucks had an officer on it, and he says, we can't go any further off that course because we have to be escorted. This is the rule of Egypt now because there was terrorism and all this stuff going on, and frightened of anyone being killed, we'd have to have an escort. I said, well, I said to our guy, do we have to pay for this? He says, no, it's a service Egypt provide, which I thought was quite good. So off we had 3 vehicles in our convoy. We had our 2x4s, and in front of us was the military vehicle, and our guide was in that to show him the way, which way we were going. Anyhow, we eventually got to the actual monastery. We were told it wasn't the right one, but the monastery monk there spoke good English. In fact, he was educated in America, and he says we have to get to where we got. He looked at the map. He says where we got to get to, we need to go to another monastery in a place called Wadi Rayyan. Okay. And he says you wouldn't be able to cross the desert because it will be. Although it's the shortest route, but you might get trapped in a drift of sand, and we're talking about desert. In any case, we had 2 4x4s, but the military escort only had just a regular Toyota truck, so they couldn't take us. So we took the long way round to get to this place where this Wadi Rayyan is. I said, well, how are we going to find it? He said, well, I'll give you some directions, and he spoke in Arabic to our guide. He says when you get out there, you're going to pass a ranger station, and then you'll have to go off-road into the desert to find this monastery. He says actually it's not a monastery, it's monks living in caves, which they've been doing that for quite a few hundred years, and they want to keep away from everywhere, so they need it nice and quiet, so they're out in the desert living in caves, and that's their monastery. After staying overnight in the wrong monastery, we continued the next day and headed by our military escort. In actual fact, the monk at the monastery wrote on a bit of paper introducing us to the monk at this Wadi Rayyan monastery, so we at least had an introduction to just walk into a monastery in the middle of the desert without knowing who we were. Anyway, it took us about 5 hours to reach this ranger outpost that we spoke about on the edge of the desert, and our guide told the military escort that we were going to the monastery to pray, no other reason. And we bribed the officer to let us go on our own. In any case, they couldn't go out into the desert, but they said that we have to go with one of the rangers, who was like a police sort of a ranger, who would take us out and show us the way to get to this monastery because we couldn't get there. There was no roads, there was nothing.
Well, plus they don't want like the incident of you going out there, getting stuck in a sand dune, and them having to go rescue you. They just figured they'll send one of the guys with you.
Exactly. So the rangers come with us. It took about 2.5 hours or a couple of hours to get there because one of our vehicles, even with a ranger in it, got stuck in the sand. We actually got stuck. I was a bit nervous. I thought, wow, how long are we going to get stuck here for? But fortunately, before we left, I suggested we buy some ropes in case one of us gets stuck so the other vehicle can pull him out. And luckily we did because we could pull him out. One of the drivers, one of the guys, that's the guy from the Switzerland, he was a very good driver. He'd done a lot of driving on the sand, so he knew how to drive. But the other guy from Wales, he was good, but he wasn't that good. We got stuck. Anyhow, just unfortunate. But we arrived in the monks' caves by about nightfall. It was just getting dark, actually. And after showing him the slip of paper, one of the monks, he accepted us, and he showed it to the father there, and we all went into one of the chapels, which was cut into the rock in the big cave. Well, not that big, but the cave. And we stayed there for their prayers. It was all in Arabic. We couldn't understand it, but we did our own prayers when we were in there. And afterwards, we told them a little about what we're doing. And, I mean, we could trust the monks, and we could tell them what we're doing and why we were there. And we pointed out where we wanted to go. that's in the westerly direction from where the cave was. And we were surprised when they said that they always knew there was something spiritual out in that direction, but they never had the facilities to go out there. And I said, what do you mean something spiritual? They said, well, we came out to this area because we know there's something out, something here, something spiritual to make us come to open up our monastery. Well, a few hundred years ago, they were told that there's something out there. This is why we've got to build the monastery out this area.
Wow.
So we were offered a large cave to sleep in. We all slept in a big cave. When you think of the cave, it's just like a big room. It was all well done. There was beds there, and beds were made out of stone with mattresses on top and stuff like that there. There was no lighting in there, so we had candles and everything were there. But fortunately, where these monks were, they had an actual toilet and water system. They had to actually carry their water up from an oasis, which was about a mile away. They had to truck it up every day because they never had water where they were. Right. They also showed us a cave nearby where they were erecting a chapel. They found a cave. This was quite interesting. What they did, they found a large cave out in the desert. One of the monks found it near where they were, about half a mile away, and it had a very low ceiling. And a miracle happened because they thought it'd make a nice chapel for them, but the ceiling was too low. But when they went back about a month later to inspect it again, they found that a miracle happened, that the ceiling collapsed. And they dug it all out, and they found that after digging it all out, it took them quite a few months, and they've got about 35 monks who were in this monastery. They dug it all out, and they found that the ceiling was then about 12 feet high. It was like a miracle happened. It was just cool. Anyway, the following day, we went out to the direction to where we thought the hill would be. And after a couple of hours, we encountered a sandstorm. We get a sandstorm out in the desert. You don't know what can happen.
Right. You better head for the cave if that happens.
We're trying to head back home because the next day we had to go back to Cairo because one of the guy's girlfriend, we had to meet him in Cairo, and we were already a few days overdue because we went to the wrong monastery the first day. So we thought we'd start heading back to the caves. But before we left, we clambered 30 foot, that was quite hard, of a huge sand dune because we'd stopped in front of this big sand dune, and to go around it would have been a long way, so we thought, let's get to the top and see what the terrain looked like from the top. And when we got to the top, through binoculars, we were able to glimpse a pyramid-shaped hill way out in the distance. It was way out, probably about, maybe about 8-9 miles away. So we planned on going back to Egypt the next year. We thought, we'll go back next year and see if we know where we got to go and everything else, and hopefully the weather will be good, and we'll spend more time there. But unfortunately, well, it wasn't unfortunate, two of the group that went with us, a couple of months later, went back without telling me, as I presume they wanted to find the ark for their own purposes. And they never even told me they're going to go out there.
Right, they just made their own plans, but
didn't made their own plans, and they just went off on their own. I found this out afterwards, and I was upset at the time. But however, they were unable to get to that hill. They couldn't get there.
Okay, so you found out that they didn't make it.
That they couldn't make it, and since then, well, a year or so later, one of them died, and the other went out again, and he still couldn't find it. Wow. No doubt they're not meant to find the hill or possibly to find the ark.
Or the cave, for that matter.